I ask this as someone who worked 70 to 90 hours every week for 4 years. I did it to survive and nothing more. It absolutely destroyed my mental health and made me genuinely despise a career I used to love, leading to a complete career change. Now, it seems like if you are not working that much or simply do not want to, people make you out to be lazy. To clarify some things, I am not attacking people with a good work ethic. I pride myself on mine and believe in hard work. I am more talking about the whole "I suffer, so should you" mentality of people and the idea that you should have to work this much just to get by. I understand this is apparently a very American way of thinking and is so ingrained in how our society was built. Again, I do not mean this to offend anyone who wants to work a lot, but needing to work that much to survive should be criminal. Story 1. People have some weird, distorted idea that working a lot makes them of higher status. Why would you want to work a lot? The goal should be to make the most amount of money in the least time possible, financial efficiency. That leaves you time for family, hobbies, and so on. Story 2. I spent 10 years in the military, then got out and worked as a restaurant manager for a well-known chain. I lasted 10 months. I lost weight, lost my girlfriend, was stressed to the max, got little sleep and no time off. For pay that would barely let me afford a room at a shared house and keep gas in a car with an engine block about to part ways with itself. The military life was far easier. I have a good friend whose job literally defines him as a person. His self-worth is directly tied to his career success. He makes far more than I do now, has the forget you money to buy just about whatever he wants, whenever he wants. He and I trade jokes all the time about being successful. Personally, I'm not willing to give up 70 to 90 hours a week out of the limited time I have on this earth just so I can buy the next big toy that comes out. But that's his life in a nutshell, and I'm happy for him, truly. For me, though, I've never heard of anyone sitting in a nursing home saying, "Gosh, I wish I'd have worked more." No thanks. I work to live, not the other way around. People can only judge you if you let them. Story 3. Jesus, where do you live that you need over 80 hours a week just to survive? Even in my country, 40 hours a week is enough, though barely. Story 4. I'm having trouble understanding what an 80-hour work week looks like. I can't imagine how difficult that would be. If my math is right, there's no way you'd be getting more than 4 hours of sleep per night. Wouldn't that eventually harm you? Edit. I forgot some people work weekends. How do you do that and not go crazy? Story 5. Mostly brainwashing. So many of us were raised by barely there workaholic fathers and learned that being successful looked like that. As a root cause, a lack of a living wage is probably to blame, in that working so many hours is a necessary evil for a lot of blue-collar workers. It's so systemic now that a lot of men don't know anything else. Story 6. No clue. None. People take pride in hustling or having a side hustle. Forget all that noise. I barely want to do the one job I have now. I don't want or need more money. I need more time off or more hours in the day to do the things I enjoy. I will never do 80-hour weeks. Forget that. Story 7. This is an American phenomenon. Americans are so brainwashed they think this is a good thing. If you get a handful of people who commute from suburbs into the city for work, in 5 minutes they will begin complaining about their commute. They are not complaining. They are bragging. A few years ago, the humble brag for female executives was, "Who has time for sex?" It is insane. But the corporations have Americans convinced that this is the way to live. Story 8. When I was making $125 per hour as a tech consultant for a Fortune 50 company, I was pretty cool with working 80-hour weeks. I did it for 6 months, then took 2 months off to sit on the beach all day. Story 9. Commercial fishermen work off the coast of Maine. During the season from June to December, 80 to 90-hour work weeks are normal. They make really good money for 6 months of the year and take 6 months off during winter and spring. I love the hard work and long hours, but I couldn't imagine grinding like that year-round. Story 10. My father is at his restaurant for 70 to 80 hours every week. I think it has to do with greed and control. If he were to hire some more people, he would have to pay them. But also, they would start to take control of certain aspects as their responsibilities are defined. Story 11. It all goes back to selling the idea of being rich to poor people who will never be rich. That is why you have people on food stamps defending billionaires on the internet, because they think one day they will be a billionaire. I am very fortunate. I make enough to provide for my family and then some. My wife only works part-time, so she has her own cash to play with. I work about 15 hours a week in the winter and probably 25 in the summer. I want everyone to have the time they need without work playing such a huge part of their life like I do, and that is why I vote for candidates that support things like a universal basic income or Medicare for all. Story 12. I don't need it to survive. I'm just stuck on this money. It's embarrassing how often I work. Another big part is my family judging me for leaving a career job with great benefits. They think I was crazy, but I worked my early 20s away. I don't plan on continuing. I just want to live in the woods and travel. Story 13. I work long hours, but I am not necessarily proud of it, particularly in these COVID times. I'm a single dad with elementary-aged kids and need to help them with schoolwork throughout the day. Since we aren't in the office, I have a lot of virtual meetings. It feels like I can only get things done after the kids are in bed. I usually get up at 6:30, make them breakfast, and do a little work before their school starts, then work until around 5 o'clock. I take a break to make dinner and hang out with them until 8 o'clock when they go to bed. Then I just work until around midnight and go to bed. Story 14. Okay, funnily enough, I have a bit of my university dissertation on this topic. More so when it reaches a boiling point and the corporation tries to talk its way out of being ridiculed for it. But first off, I did some reading, and some people found that in fields where workers find their work as having high value personal, so it depends on individuals, they are more willing to work additional hours. Also, the idea of a working family in the workplace appeared. But to be honest, with the low wages, this working family is quite literal in the sense that if I do not finish this task, someone else will suffer for me. This is common in project-based or team-based work. And, of course, in many fields where this occurs, some do not have unions and therefore are at a disadvantage, or have literal clauses for mandatory overtime. It's more of a control mechanism put forward by the corporations. I feel like one of those conspiracy theorists. Also, if people are more willing and are proud of this, they are probably trying to rationalize this themselves. As this control method is put in place, it desensitizes workers, sometimes to a point where they do not see working this much as an actual problem. Story 15. I blame boomers. They have this mentality that the more you work, the better human being you are, and they were proud to work 80-hour weeks mostly because they at least had a home and cars and all the other luxuries we millennials will likely never enjoy. Story 16. Some feel it is a personal achievement that they are proud of, like running a marathon. Others feel it is a misguided sense of accomplishment that really only benefits the employer. I see it as both. Like you, I worked ridiculous hours for years. I felt like Superman at first and that there would be a reward at the end. This is just temporary was my mental mantra through the first few years. Then it got worse. When my hours started peaking around 110 to 118 hours per week, it was simply out of control. Why do it? At face value, the overtime was nice, but it certainly wasn't worth the mental and physical anguish. Plus, my house and belongings were falling into disrepair because everything was neglected. My wife felt neglected. My health failed. Ultimately, I did what I did because I felt that people depended on me. In reality, many people did. Had I not worked myself nearly to death, many people would have lost their jobs due to extreme oversight by greedy executive management. Unfortunately, the biggest unintended consequence of my actions was ensuring a 7 and even 8-digit payout bonus for the dirtbags at the top. Weigh it out. Who is benefiting most? Story 17. David Cho, a habitual addict and an amazing introspective person, once said, "The most accepted type of addiction in society is workaholism." I believe he is absolutely right. Society and people look at workaholics with respect as valuable productive members, and people buy into that notion. Companies enjoy it because they get more productivity, and workaholics receive praise and respect, even at the cost of their social life and sanity. The rate of burnout and loss of sanity is real, but that's not what people like to focus on. Story 18. In short, the United States education system teaches people how to be an employee. I mean, it's a big indicator that schools don't teach about taxes, credit, investments, etc. Story 19. Part of it is a superiority complex. That is, no one wants to feel like an idiot, so they justify being overworked as them just being less lazy than the next person. Moreover, as a society, we praise people who overcome hardship and go above and beyond, versus those who just get by and are wholly mediocre, or even worse, those who are very privileged to not have to work. Story 20 probably explains why the divorce rate is 62.8% and suicide is the 10th cause of death. European countries work a 36-hour work week. Suicide and divorce rates are much lower. Story 21. I don't think anybody working 80 hours a week is simultaneously bragging about it and surviving off it. People that brag about working 80 hours a week probably make money beyond their means of survival and then buy boats. Story 22. Two biggest lies people on a job spout. 1. I work a certain number of hours per week and only need 3 hours of sleep. Okay. Then why do you drink 11 cups of coffee per day and look exhausted? I come from a very modest background. Work hours are a humble brag designed to make others seem inferior. In every corporate job I ever had, there was always the nobody works more hours than me champion. Usually, it is a pretentious person there from 9 to 9, but didn't do anything meaningful from 10 to 4. It doesn't matter. Management values that because they honestly have no other way to judge people's worth. FaceTime rules. Story 23. I worked over 100 hours per week for around 5 months, and after that managed to dwindle it down to 70 to 80 a week. After 2 years, I too am going to leave the thing I love and change careers. I want those years back. I miss seeing my baby girl grow up, and for what? So another company or entity can benefit. It did nothing for me, but it did almost kill me. I lost 40 pounds, and I began having scary health problems at a very young age. I just want to go back in time and tell myself to stop this before it started. I am certainly not proud of working like that. It's terrible. Story 24. I never heard of anyone bragging about working 80 hours a week. I didn't like working that much, so I am changing careers. Those in high finance should expect to work 80 or more hours a week, but they get fairly compensated after a few years with insane compensation growth. I never met a hustler who actually worked anywhere near 80 hours a week. Story 25. I think it's old-fashioned values that the harder you work, the more successful you will be. This does not apply to everyone, and smart working has started to be more practical. People who can carry out their work responsibilities in 40 hours a week are just as successful as those who do it in double the time. I have noticed people who have an old-fashioned work ethic or older people who do not have much to do outside work think like this. Story 26. Because it's about paying the price. It's about realizing you're the boss of yourself. I did it to survive and nothing more. Well, that's not smart. And that's probably not the full truth if you think about it. The pride for most people comes from the light bulb moment. The moment when the self-actualized person realizes, I'm in charge of myself and where I go, for better or worse. I'm going to fix it so that I never have to do that again. Live and work hard for 4, 8, or 10 years so that 20 years later you don't have to work so hard. Don't confuse the number of hours with the quantity and quality of the work. And don't confuse today's sacrifice for tomorrow's rewards. If you work the bare minimum, it's what you'll make. An early boss taught me that. Man, was that a good lesson for young me to hear. Work harder on yourself than your job. Spend 40 hours at a job every week, but 20 hours improving the skills you bring to the marketplace and see where you're working and what you're doing in 2, 3, or 4 years. Story 27. It's like Canadians being proud of the long, cold winter. It's miserable, but there's some kind of joy in showing how we survived it. Perhaps it's a backward way to show how tough we are. Story 28. Because this country had been misled for so long into believing your only worth comes from work, people think that's the norm. Not traveling, spending time with loved ones, or even enjoying oneself. Story 29. Sadly, too many people are brainwashed with work, capitalism, and consumerism. This is the same reason I barely talk to my family ever since I've become independent. Baby boomers and Generation X just don't get it. I fear it's going to kill us all with the ongoing effects of climate change. Universal basic income could act as a transitional phase towards a moneyless society as jobs keep getting automated. I highly recommend reading The New Human Rights Movement, Reinventing the Economy to End Oppression by Peter Joseph, which goes in depth on the history, unsustainability, and how insane the current economic models really are. Interview from 3 years ago about the book, but on point with current socioeconomic problems, especially climate change, technological unemployment, and poverty. Story 30. Because they think that working 70 to 80 hours will somehow make them tougher and richer, when in fact it just kills them sooner and won't ever make them rich unless it's your own venture, and even then. The idea that hard work is what gets you somewhere is something made popular by corporate promoters who prey on these people's ignorance. Story 31. I think if you're working 80 to 90 hours to survive, you're making terrible career choices. If you're working 80 to 90-hour weeks and raking in the money, then grind, baby, stack and grind. Story 32. Stockholm Syndrome. They have to do it, and that makes them feel powerless. To get back a sense of control, they convince themselves that it's something to be proud of. Those poor people are just being used. When their masters are done with them, they will be thrown in the trash like any used-up resource. Story 33. I think those who work that much and are happy to do so are those who get paid well enough to combat the stress that comes with it. I remember when I was working that much, I was barely making enough money to survive. My vacation was spent catching up on sleep, and after that I just left it. Story 34. It justifies their delusion. I used to say, I'll work bell to bell for you, but I get 2 full days off. I wanted my managers to know that when I was there to work, I would go all in, but when I am off, I am not thinking about work.